Bond, James Bond, bond servant, that is. This Sunday, we begin a 5-week series on the 5 chapters of the letter that James writes to the 12 tribes who are dispersed throughout the known world at that time. And so James gives to us some powerful considerations, some powerful truths. Chapter 1 is kind of the introduction to the rest of the letter, what has been broken up into chapter 1. And each section of chapter 1, as James explains who he's writing to and giving some real proverbial kind of wisdom to us. We have these passages that say in verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. And then later on in that same passage in chapter 1, he says to not ever think that the Lord is tempting us, right? He talks about persevering under trials, but don't mistake the trials we face as temptations from God. And then he talks about how sin develops in the life of a person. And then he goes on to talk about every good gift, every perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights. Kind of going along with the Psalms and how he doesn't try to explain God or why this is, but he does describe who God is, his character. And then he goes on to talk about the power of our words and how we must be careful to speak carefully. And then he goes on to say not to be just hearers of the word, but doers also. And he gives this imagery of comparing it to looking at ourselves in a mirror and wondering, are we living by the image we see in the mirror, or are we living to bear the image of God in the world around us? And then he finally gets to this point at the end of chapter 1 where he says, the pure and undefiled religion is this, that we are to visit and care for the widows and orphans in their distress. And then the rest of the letter, the rest of the letter that's divided up into the next 4 chapters, chapters 2 through 5, all follow the outline. It all talks about in chapter 2 about faith without works is dead. Chapter 3 is about the power of our words and the power of the tongue. Chapter 4 then gets into the idea of these things that we are to avoid so that we do live an undefiled life in this world. And then finally, in chapter 5, some final instructions about the suffering that the believers face, about what we're to do in times of sickness, how we can go to the elders and be anointed with oil and expect to not only be forgiven of our sins, but have our sicknesses healed and restored because of the power of Jesus Christ. And so I hope you can plan to join us. 8:30 Sunday morning, we begin James chapter 1 as we look at this bondservant of the Lord and the bondservant of Jesus Christ. So please join us 8:30 in the adult study room.